So today we're going to be working on the distance formula. So the very first thing we're going to have to know is, what is distance formula? Well, go ahead and write this down. The distance formula is the square roots, and go ahead and make a very long square root symbol. It's going to be the quantity x sub 2 minus x sub 1 squared plus the quantity y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. So looking at this formula, it might seem a little intimidating because it's long and it's a lot of memorization. So today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be teaching you two methods. One that requires you only to memorize Pythagorean Theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and then this method, which would be to memorize this formula. I'll let you choose which one you feel most comfortable with. So let's look at our first example. It says use a distance formula to find the distance between the coordinates below. So what I'm going to do now is, in order to use the distance formula, I'm going to need to first identify the different coordinates. So I'm going to call one x sub 1 and I'm going to call 4 y sub 1. Therefore, I'm going to call the 9 x sub 2 and the 10 y sub 2. Now that I know these values, all I'm going to have to do is plug it into the formula I was given. So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of x sub 2, which is 9, subtract that from x sub 1, which is 1, and I'm going to square that quantity. I will then add that to y sub 2, which is 10, and then subtract that from y sub 1, which is 4, and then I will square that quantity as well. Now that I have all my numbers plugged in, I just need to simplify what I have. So I'm going to take the square root of 9 minus 1 is 8, but then I have to square that, so that's going to become 64, plus 10 minus 4 is 6, but when I square that, it becomes 36. I still need to continue to simplify. 64 plus 36 is 100, perfect. So the square root of 100 is positive or negative 10. But again, is there such thing as negative distance? So I'm going to go ahead and exclude that option, and I'm going to say the distance is 10 units. Please make sure you write the word units, since a unit wasn't given to us. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and give you another option. So this one requires you to memorize this distance formula right here. This one is going to require you to also memorize a formula, but it's only going to make you memorize a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which is the Pythagorean Theorem. So if I asked you which one would you rather choose, Pythagorean Theorem or the distance formula, what would you choose? Pythagorean Theorem, just because it's a little bit easier. So let me show you what that looks like. So yesterday we talked about rise and run. So I'm going to go ahead and say there's a rise, and I'm going to call that one of the legs of the right triangle. And then there is a run. I'm going to call that the second leg of the triangle, so I'm going to call that leg 2. Now it's just a matter of calculating what is the rise, what is the run. The rise runs up and down, and the axis that runs up and down is my y-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and concentrate on the y-axis. How did 17 become 17? You add 0. So don't let this confuse you. Just know that it's 0. There is no length. That's what it means. There is no length. Now the run, since it runs from left to right, that's the x-coordinate. So how did 5 become 14, everyone? How does 5 become 14? You add 9. So basically now I have a rise of 0 and a run of 9. So I'm going to draw that real quick to kind of see what that gives me. So it's not going to rise at all. So I'm not going to draw a line. But it does run 9. So I'm going to go ahead and let it run 9. So there is no triangle. It's just a line. What is the distance of this line? It's 9. So I'm going to say the distance is 9. Some of you are like, wait, that was too easy. I don't get it. Well, let me prove it to you. If this was one of the legs, if I plug it into the Pythagorean Theorem, I would get 0 squared plus 9 squared equals, I'm going to call the distance d squared. 0 squared is 0. 9 squared is 81 equals d squared. Solve for d. Oh, look. D equals positive or negative 9. So it gives you the same answer, but I want you to be smart and say, oh, look, the distance is just 9. Okay, any questions there? So let's try one together. Let's try this one. So for this problem right here, in order to find the distance, I'm going to go ahead and use the Pythagorean Theorem. And in order to do that, I must identify the 2 legs. So I'm going to call it rise as leg 1 and run as leg 2. So please help me out, boys and girls. If I'm trying to figure out the rise, which coordinates should I be looking at? Tell me in 3, 2, 1, go. Y. So how does a -7 become a -12? Since they're the same sign, I can just think about it logically. How does a -7 become a -12? Is it getting bigger or smaller? Smaller. So I'm subtracting how much? Is there such a thing as -5 distance? No, so I'm going to take the absolute value, which means how far is -5 from 0? And you would say 5. So this is, my length is 5. Now run, if rise is my y values, then run must be what, everyone? The x values. How does 4 become -8? So here, I want you to take a pause. This one's slightly different. I'm going from 2 different signs. I'm going from a positive to a negative. So I like to show it like this. I'm going to say I'm going from 4 all the way to -8. In order for this to happen, I must cross what number? 0. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that there's a 0 in between. 4 to 0 is I have to do what? Subtract 4. Everyone, how do I get from 0 to -8? Subtract 8. So altogether I am subtracting 12. Can my distance be negative though? No. So I'm going to take the absolute value. So how far is -12 from 0? 12. So I'm going to say the distance is 12. Now look what I have here. My rise is 5. So just to give myself a visual, I'm going to show a rise of 5. Then I have a run of 12. So I'm going to show a run of 12. So now I'm going to go ahead and close it to make a right triangle. I just created a hypotenuse. What does this hypotenuse represent? The distance, right? So imagine these were the 2 points. This represents the distance. So your hypotenuse is your distance. So now I'm going to go ahead and plug it into my formula. 5 squared plus 12 squared equals d squared. Now I want you to go ahead and try to solve this on your own. What would the distance be between these 2 coordinates? Go ahead and try it by yourself. So now let's go over the answer. Looking around, it seems like most of you guys had the same answer. So what is the distance between these 2 points? Everyone tell me in 3, 2, 1, go.
13 units.
So I'm going to say the distance is 13 units. Now, I want you to go ahead and try numbers 4, 5, and 6 on your own. So for our next example, what you're going to notice is this is not going to be a nice whole number. Okay, so watch what happens here. So again, since I'm using Pythagorean Theorem, I'm going to have to identify a rise and a run. And I'm going to go ahead and refer to them as leg 1, leg 2. It really doesn't matter which leg you call it. Just understand that there's 2 of them and they're different lengths. Well, sometimes. So here, in order to figure out rise, help me out here. How do I figure out rise? I have to look at what coordinates? The y's. How does -8 become -10? Since they're the same signs, it's easy, right? Is it getting bigger or smaller?
Bigger. No, smaller.
Smaller, so I'm subtracting how much? Everyone? 2. So can I have a negative distance?
No.
No, so I'm going to take the absolute value of -2. How far is -2 from 0? 2. So it's going to be 2. Now for run, if it's going to go from left to right, which coordinate would that be? Everyone, please tell me in 3, 2, 1, go.
X-axis.
Perfect. So how does a 5 become a -9? And again, if they are different signs, I want you to do this, okay, so that you don't accidentally make a mistake. If I'm trying to go from 5 to -9, I have to cross what number? 0. So how do I get from 5 to 0?
-5.
And how do I get from 0 to -9? How do I get from 0 to -9? Subtract 9. So altogether, I am subtracting how much?
14.
Can I have a negative 14 as a distance? So I'm going to take the
Absolute value.
absolute value. How far is negative 14 from 0? 14. So my rise is 2, so let's draw that to give ourselves a visual. The rise is 2, and the run is 14. So this hypotenuse that I'm drawing in right now represents what? It represents the distance between these 2 points. So now I'm going to go ahead and plug this into the Pythagorean Theorem. 2 squared plus 14 squared equals d squared. 2 squared is 4, 14 squared is 196 equals d squared. Help me out. What is 196 plus 4? 200. Can I say the distance is 200? No, I still need to do what, everyone?
Square it.
Square it? Take the square root of both sides. So this is not a perfect square. So I'm going to go ahead and use a calculator. First, remember, you need to type in 200, and then you can go ahead and click the square root symbol. If I'm asked to round to the nearest 10th, my answer would be exactly or approximately? Approximately 14 and 1/10. Perfect. I'm going to say D is approximately 14 and 1/10 units. And the reason why we say approximately is because we're using 3.14 as pi. And pi, we know, is irrational. It goes on forever. So that's why it's an approximation. So I'm going to write down the distance is approximately 14 and 1/10 units. So for example number 8, I still want you to be familiar with the distance formula and how to use it. Okay, so I'm actually going to use the distance formula for number 8. So the first thing I want to do is write down the formula. Distance equals the square root of x sub 2 minus x sub 1 quantity squared plus the quantity y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. I can tell that some of you already prefer this method. However, I still want you to go ahead and show me the work for distance formula. I want you to recognize both of them. So here I'm going to go ahead and label this x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. I need to plug it into my formula. The distance equals the quantity x sub 2, which is 9, minus x sub 1, which is 11. I'm going to square that quantity. Then add y sub 2, which is negative 4, minus y sub 1, which is 2, and I will square that quantity as well. So now I'm left with d equals the square root of 9 minus 11 is negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36. So I'm left with d equals the square root of 40. Is this a perfect square? No, so I'm going to go ahead and use a calculator, and I'm going to type in 40, and then it can click the square root symbol. If I rounded my answer to the nearest 10th, the distance is exactly or approximately? Approximately 6 and 3/10. So let's write that down. The distance is approximately, you told me it was 6 and 3/10 units.
Did you have to write that on the
On your homework, I don't mind if you just put D equals or D is approximately, okay?
And do we have to use D or D?
I would prefer you to use D because it makes me think of distance, okay? Otherwise, you're going to have to write out the word distance. So now, I want you to go ahead and try the next 4 examples on your own.
Use my